2 weeks, and it's just kind of hit me that I've been on this earth that long and been through a lot of really incredible experiences. I've always been different from everybody I know, different from my family, different from my friends, different from the world, and lived my life differently, and I've always loved that. I imagine I may have had times when it might have been bothersome. My mother disowned me at one point in my life, and I just said, oh well, and kept going. So I thought it would be fun to speak to you and talk to you about feminism first, since that's one of your interests and one of the reasons for your club. Have you got a good definition of feminism? Anybody? I saw on your wall up there one that looked really good to me. But it kind of sounds like a person who supports the equality of women and men, one who believes in the social, political, and economical equality of the sexes. That is a real dry definition compared to when I was in my 20s and 30s and the women's movement started. There have been waves of feminism. In the beginning, women were just fighting for their lives. They had no choice. They were property. We had no rights. We had nothing except bear those children, clean this house, etc. Well, there have always been women that stood out, didn't fit into that mold, but for the most part, that was the way it was. My mother's generation, they didn't have choices. You didn't get divorced if you were miserable or living with a man that was abusive or any of those things. You really didn't have choices. So the real definition of feminism to me, and to most of the women that were experiencing it in the 60s and 70s, was just to have choice. To be able to choose to stay home and be a mom if you wanted to, or to be able to choose to go outside the house, or to be able to choose to be married or not, any of those things. And then, of course, little by little, all the other choices came in. Choosing your sexual partners, choosing your sexual identity, choosing anything that was your life. And there's a thing that Oprah Winfrey always says, that she's standing on the shoulders of activists before her who made it possible to be who she is. You guys probably don't even realize that you're standing on the shoulders of women who did not have the choices that you do, who fought against being held down and put into the box of the house. So I think that's a pretty cool thing. There was a quote that I ran across when I was looking through some information about feminism. And there's a woman named Claire Booth Luce. You've probably heard her name before in your history. I couldn't tell you what it was that she did. Maybe Jessica could, but I can't tell you what it was she did. I do know she was a famous woman. She says, because I am a woman, I must make unusual efforts to succeed. If I fail, no one will say she doesn't have what it takes. They will say women don't have what it takes. That's a big burden on women nowadays, particularly given the fact that we fought so hard to be able to be in the workplace and to do our jobs, but we still often want to be mothers and have children and maybe even have a husband or a partner, and it's a lot of pressure. You may be able to do it all, you may not, but the idea that I want to put forth is not to put anything in a box. And I think you all going to this school know that probably better than the average teenager. You don't have to be in a box here. You can be whoever you are. You can study what you need to, want to. You can be the person you want to be, pretty much. And even that has pressures on it, because once you leave this school, I'm sure you come into the real world and that changes a little bit. So that's all I want to say about feminism. Just realize that there were women before you, wonderful, smart, intelligent women, and even men who supported rather than fought against women being all that they can be. Anybody have any questions about anything? It doesn't have to be feminism, because Christopher said you might have questions. Anything? Anything about life? Anything you want to ask an old woman that doesn't put anything in a box?
What were some of the things that you did to fight for equal rights?
We had, strangely enough, what was called consciousness-raising groups back in the early 70s. And that was how I got involved in the women's young woman that I met asked me if I wanted to join her consciousness raising group, and I had no idea what she was asking me to do. And I can remember saying to my mom, I'm going to go to a consciousness raising group, and she looked at me like, what? I was already married and had children, and I said, you know, where women are going to talk about liberation and being free and being independent. And she looked at me and said, why would you want to be any more independent than you are? It was foreign to her. So we started out often I lived in Kansas City, Kansas. We weren't in New York, we weren't in Chicago, we weren't in San Francisco, we were in Kansas City, Kansas. So it was a small start for us. We got together and talked about what it was to be women, what we thought it should be to be women, and then we looked for ways to get involved in the community, oftentimes just supporting. I don't recall ever going out and burning our bras or doing anything like that, but we did march and we did do everything we could to support other women. That was kind of where it started for me. And then I was 18 years old, newly married, got in a car and drove across country and lived in Washington, D.C. for the first year. I was really wrapped up in my life there, so I kind of lost touch. But I lived there when Martin Luther King was killed. I drove through the streets to get to work every day. I worked at the National Geographic Society. I drove through the streets where there was rioting and people were burning things and tearing things up. I was never afraid because I knew it wasn't about physical harm. It was about frustration and tearing things up in frustration. So there, again, mostly for me, in those years, in my young years, it was about just supporting other women, no matter what it was that they wanted. If it was wanting out of a bad marriage, wanting to grow, wanting to go to school, whatever it was, we just supported each other. And it was a really valuable thing to have in those times. My activism didn't come into play until much later in life because I was having children, being married, having jobs, you know, things that in my life kept me so busy. I guess I just didn't think about being actively involved, but I could never let go of whenever a woman needed me, whenever there was a group getting together to make a change, supporting it in some way, whether it was with my presence or whatever work they needed me to do. Now, Karen and I, as Christopher said, are on the board of Stonewall Democrats of Southern Nevada. Do you know what Stonewall is?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. Is there anybody that doesn't?
I don't.
All right, Stonewall is the Democratic group that supports the LGBTQ community. And we work on issues. We went to the National Equality March 2 years ago. It was amazing. You were there? Oh, cool. It was so amazing. I don't know whether you remember this, but the morning that we marched, the sky was blue. It was a beautiful, clear day. And at the beginning of the march, we looked up and there was a rainbow in the blue sky. It was amazing. It was one of the highlights of the day. I happen to be a straight ally. My friends in Stonewall like to out me all the time everywhere we go. They say, this is Sandy, she's our straight ally. I think philosophically, I've always felt like I was bisexual. I think people should love whoever the heck it is that they love and support equality in all people. It just so happens that my life has gone the path of having husbands and children, you know? So, did I answer your question, or did I talk too much and not answer?
No, you did. I have some new questions.
All right.
I wanted to know, because you said that in your time, that it was mostly like if you were just to get married and you really had no choice. How did your husband feel about your activism? And how has it been for you to kind of go from being in that time where you didn't have any choices and now seeing all of the choices that we do have?
Well, you know, strangely enough, I never felt like I didn't have choices. I was right on the cusp of women who didn't have a choice and women starting to have a choice. So I never felt, and also, as I said, I wasn't like everybody else. And I didn't feel that there was anything wrong with that. If I wanted to do something, I pretty much did it. So I have a very multicultural family. My children are Mexican, Italian, and all of the mixed up things that I am. My grandchildren are Mexican, black, white, all the different things. I have 3 black stepchildren, and their children are all black. So my family looks like a poster. Yeah, looks like a poster for being a melting pot. Now that freaked my little white Kansas redneck family out, of course. Eventually they all got over it because they saw I was just going to do what I was going to do.
Did your parents, like, when you decided to get married, did they have to get permission from them? And like, hey, is this person okay for me to marry? Or did you kind of say, I'm going to marry him whether I want to or not?
Well, for me, I never asked anybody if it was okay with them for me to do anything, and I still don't. I don't even